Hello everyone, this is an update following the government's latest announcements on the 20th of March, starting with social distancing measures. This involves the government's instruction that businesses and venues, including pubs, bars and restaurants, were to close on the evening of the 20th of March until further notice. If needed, the government will enforce these measures by law, although that hasn't been put into place as yet. So the following businesses and venues have been asked to close: food and drink venues for consumption on site, drinking establishments including pubs, bars and nightclubs, entertainment venues including cinemas and theatres, museums, galleries, spas, wellness centres, casinos, betting shops, and all indoor leisure and sports facilities including gyms. The government has also urged the public to take further steps to protect themselves and the wider population from the coronavirus, including staying at home unless you need to get essential supplies and food, working from home wherever possible, and only travelling if absolutely necessary. So whilst there will not be a public transport shutdown as yet, public transport should only be used for essential travel such as commuting by key workers. Move on to possibly the most significant announcement, and that is the coronavirus job retention scheme. Now, this is open to all employers in the UK, and they can contact HMRC for a grant of up to 80% of people's wages who are not working but are furloughed, in their words, and who are kept on payroll rather than being laid off. So in the US, there is the concept of furloughed workers, which is a temporary leave of absence due to special needs of the company, normally economic. It's been described by many commentators as employers going into sleep mode or hibernation until the economy picks up. And the aim really is to keep as many people in work as possible rather than laying people off and asking them to rely on the state for support directly. So where you as a business would otherwise lay off an employee, seemingly permanently through redundancy or temporarily, you are being encouraged to keep them on payroll instead. How will this work? At the moment, we understand companies will need to designate affected employees as furloughed workers and notify employees of this change, presumably in writing. This changing of the status of employees remains subject to existing employment law and will be subject to negotiation and agreement. Companies will submit information to HMRC about the employees that have been furloughed and their earnings through a new online portal which HMRC is working on currently. Further information will be set out by them, but existing online systems will not be sufficient. The 80% of wages is capped at £2,500 per employee. The measure is backdated to the 1st of March and can include anybody dismissed or laid off after the 28th of February. The measure will last for 3 months initially. Employers can top up this sum to 100% if they wish, although again that's a matter for agreement between the two parties. The first grants are not expected to be paid until the end of April, so there may be other financial measures that you need to rely on if cash flow is an issue before that time. Now, in practice, it's not particularly clear what other requirements are in place for the grant to be applied for, if any. Some businesses have already laid staff off, but questions remain over a number of scenarios. For example, if you've agreed a temporary pay cut but kept everyone employed and working, will this apply to you? Arguably not, because it would only apply to people who would be permanently or temporarily laid off. If you're just starting to struggle now, will it apply to you? My view is yes. It's not necessarily retrospective in action, so if you start to suffer a downturn going forward, I think it will apply to you. If you don't have a contractual right to lay off temporarily, as most businesses don't, it will be a matter for agreement, and I expect that you will have the support of employees, especially where there is such wage protection from the government. There are question marks about whether the system will be open to abuse. So if a business said that they would lay 100% of their staff off, could they benefit from the 80% for every worker? We expect employers to make an honest assessment of the position on an ongoing basis. It would seem more beneficial for employers who are struggling to agree and propose and agree individual layoffs rather than measures such as short-time working or pay cuts across the business in order to be entitled to these benefits. We have had another query since the announcement has been made, and that is in the following example. So a transport company has 10 driving routes and 10 drivers in the good times. Now there is only a need for one driver and one route. Is it the case that we could furlough 9 of these workers? The answer to me is yes. But then, do we have to only provide work to one of the drivers, or could we share that around? Now, essentially, you're asking, if I've laid somebody off, do I have to keep them laid off and only provide work to my staff on site? Now, my hope is that the government will not object to businesses notifying HMRC of workers who would otherwise be laid off, but then finding ways to provide them with work if it's all possible. The aim is to retain people in employment, and I don't think it's with the aim of preventing them from then carrying out any work, but that does remain to be seen in the technical guidance, which we don't have as yet. This scheme may also be appropriate for those who are self-isolating as a precautionary measure if they live with a vulnerable adult, or for those who cannot work from home but have to remain at home because of school closures affecting childcare. In other news, the Coronavirus Business Interruption Loan Scheme, which is a largely backed government loan for SMEs up to the value of £5 million. It's been announced that the interest-free period has increased from 6 to 12 months. Loans should be available on Monday, and all of the major banks are participating. With regard to VAT payments, the next quarter of VAT payments will be delayed. So that's if you've got a payment due between the 20th of March and the 30th of June, you will have until the end of the financial year to repay those bills. Businesses who are worried they might miss any further payments are encouraged to ring the new HMRC telephone line, which is 0800 0159 559. For the self-employed, the next self-assessment payments will be deferred until January 2021. For those self-employed individuals who cannot work, universal credit at a rate equivalent to SSP will now be payable. And for renters, in addition to the protection that was announced for mortgage payments last week, the local housing allowance will cover at least 30% of market rents. The only other announcement which is relevant to employers and of note is that driving tests and theory tests will be suspended for 3 months except for critical workers, and MOT tests are suspended for 3 months. And finally, for those of you who are watching on Monday, I thought I would let you know it is my birthday today. Here is the card which has been signed by all of our team. One unnamed colleague suggested that the measure of social distancing is nothing new to me anyway, so I will be just fine. Anyway, it did remind me of the need to say thank you to all my colleagues for their efforts and support in keeping our clients updated and pitching in a number of different ways. Don't forget to say thanks to your people in these tough times too. Thank you.